All right, everybody, how you doing?
Hi.
Thank you.
So, what a day to be alive. I hope this is the best 20 minutes of your day. We're gonna try. The topic today, as Joanne mentioned, is collaboration between Michigan and California. But the truth is, it's a larger dialogue. It's a larger dialogue that takes the whole industrial Midwest into consideration and takes the whole West Coast, and for that matter, the East Coast, into consideration. When you think about it, at least being from Detroit, it started as sort of a competition 5-6 years ago, where we tried to replicate Silicon Valley, but the truth was that didn't work very well. So now we're focused on collaboration, public-private partnerships, looking at where Silicon Valley's software prowess leaves off and where, let's say, Michigan's hardware prowess picks up. So today we have a panel of experts that's going to give, I would say, a perspective that's geared more towards what startups see, but I think that's equally valuable, and it is sort of the edge of innovation when it comes to the future of automotive, the future of smart cities and transportation. So today we have Adam Jansen, and what I love about Adam is that he came from Adient, Wisconsin-based, heavy Michigan presence, focused on seating components, but focused on getting in rooms with Apple and Waymo. So if we're talking about bridging the two regions, he is literally the human version of a bridge. My buddy, Ferndale, Michigan. My God, I'm nervous. You guys are great. Roby, Bollinger Motors, you are doing some amazing things around all-wheel trucks and around creating all-electric versions of truck. Man, what is going on? And then finally, Tess Hatch, Bessemer Ventures, $3 million under investment. But you just don't focus on autonomous vehicles. You also focus on commercial drones, as well as commercial space. So with that, guys, I want to dive into just your current perspectives on sort of where Silicon Valley and Michigan are at with collaboration. And if you could, I'll direct questions at all of you individually, but if maybe we could start with all of you giving sort of an opening statement. I'll start with you, Adam.
Sure. Yeah, so I think, obviously Michigan and Silicon Valley have very different perspectives. Michigan, of course, having the manufacturing expertise, and Silicon Valley kind of being the moving really fast, but not necessarily always doing it correctly, side. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for them to come together, particularly on the side of the corporations in Michigan, maybe the big traditional OEMs and tier ones, and working with Silicon Valley startups. And I think we're beginning to see industry consolidation, or at least partnerships and POCs that eventually could lead to commercialization and a lot of exciting new projects. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Roby?
Yeah, so we are in a fundraising mode at the moment, so this is a very relevant topic for us as we start to think about how the perception is between us in the Midwest and Michigan and Silicon Valley. And I think the perception for us, certainly in the current environment, is that we manufacture things. It's a hardware business. It's not a software business. And so there is a perception that most of what you see going on in Silicon Valley is certainly more services. It's more software based. It's more cloud based. Whereas we're building trucks. So there's a disconnect there from a fundamental understanding. And I think what we're trying to do, at least in our model, is look at how can we do these things in a more capital efficient manner, so that the perception of it costs billions of dollars to do what we're doing is smashed a little bit in our model. And so that's, for us, I think as we look out at the landscape of the investor universe, it takes a very unique animal to be interested in doing a manufacturing-based business.
Like Trevor mentioned, and thank you and Planet M for having me today, I am an investor at Bessemer Venture Partners. We love to partner early with companies that hope to grow into market-leading businesses. I lead our deep tech investing, so space, drones, and autonomous vehicles. I'm headquartered in Silicon Valley in the Bay, and we don't lack a shortage of startup companies. So I love to travel, and specifically, I went to the University of Michigan for my undergrad, go Blue, so I love to go back to Michigan and Wisconsin and places in the Midwest to look for awesome companies, and specifically Michigan with the automotive history. Who is better suited to take all of those lessons and apply it to a 2019 playbook?
So when you think about some of the misconceptions that each region, West Coast, Industrial Midwest, have of each other, what comes to mind first, or what do you feel is the most prominent misconception? And any of you can take a crack at that.
I think from my perspective, I think a lot of companies on the West Coast think, first off, making a car is easy, which of course it isn't. But they look at the Midwest and they think, okay, well, these guys are just not interested in innovation, which I think is absolutely untrue. They are completely interested in innovation, but they're such large companies who are really good at doing what they're doing that sometimes they need these collaboration opportunities to, try to put them in the right direction. And I think that's something that, they're moving towards, and they're definitely very interested in continuing to move in that direction.
Common stereotypes are the Midwest is slowed down by the perhaps bureaucracy or red tape of the history of supply chain and manufacturing, and Silicon Valley moves fast and breaks things, specifically with the artificial intelligence. I think we should combine the two, and there's been great examples. There's a startup out of Michigan, AutoMobility, that's using all of the history of reliably and safely manufacturing vehicles in Michigan, but the computer vision and sensor fusion autonomy and using those forces of both the Bay and Michigan to its advantage.
I think again, I'll speak from our perspective, there's maybe a perception on our end is that, AutoMobility is a great example. I mean, they're doing some wonderful things in autonomy and moving people around in urban environments. But, when you look at things that we're doing, it's not autonomous. It's something that people are going to drive. It's using really cool technology. And so I think, the misperception maybe from the perspective of Midwest companies is that Silicon Valley follows these broad-based trends almost in a herd-like manner rather than looking for really unique opportunities. And so I think that maybe that's a misconception that we have as we look out at the landscape of what's happening where investor dollars flow.
Well, you guys are using a trend of battery technology.
Sure.
The efficiency of batteries have greatly increased so that you can now power an entire vehicle with batteries rather than, so that was a trend that Tesla and others
Yes.
pointed to, and just rather than AI, battery tech.
Yeah.
And you're in a unique position being located outside of Silicon Valley. Lately, have you seen more Silicon Valley investors leaving to visit you? I mean, and what role do you see Bollinger playing as a company in Metro Detroit, which doesn't have as many startups in Silicon Valley? How is it different for you, and do you take on any extra sort of responsibility or extra duties because of where you're based and located?
I think what we've always tried to do, and what attracted me to the team to begin with, is the vision of being unique in our space and staying very laser focused on we're building a niche vehicle. I mean, it is something that is unique. It is what we think is a position where we are as alone in the space as a Class 3 electrified SUV and pickup truck. Although it's very tempting to compare it to others in the space, I think the challenge for us, and we certainly don't try to be leading the wave anywhere, but I think the challenge for companies like us, and I hear this from other manufacturing-oriented companies, is that depending on the stage, again, I think there's fewer investors that are willing to take and look and understand true manufacturing from a base level, from a startup perspective, and then follow that all the way through. I think that's a limited number of investors.
Mm-hmm. Now, Tess, you're interesting again because of the role, or at least your interest in the role of Bessemer in commercial space, drones. And typically when the conversation comes up about Detroit and Silicon Valley, it's about who's going to win the land-based driverless vehicle race. But the truth is there's drones to consider, there's VTOL to consider, there's other air, land, space, sea mobility innovations to consider. How do you see those getting more into this sort of regional collaboration in the future?
You're absolutely right that if you take a step back, autonomy is the common theme, whether you are navigating a autonomous vehicle, whether you're navigating a drone, delivering emergency medical supplies or packages to your doorstep, whether you're launching a rocket into space and having satellites orbiting in low Earth orbit around our Earth. Something you mentioned that I thought was really interesting with all of these three, whether it's autonomous vehicles, drones, or space, is that they have massive markets and require a lot of capital. They're hardware, so they have longer feedback cycles rather than changing a line of code and pushing it to test. You have to make something. You have to test it. You have to get it certified. We were talking earlier about the process of, and that's sometimes difficult to match with venture capital funding. So pushing, there's other types of funding, and if you're not going to have that, I like to say, hockey stick growth or exponential annual recurring revenue in your near-term future, pursuing other paths of funding.
Yeah, corporate venture capital has been a much, I mean, you look at the investments in companies in the manufacturing space, I mean, you see more corporate venture capital taking a look at companies like ours, and that's a path that takes a little longer, as we were talking about earlier, and then it takes time to navigate that bureaucracy, so they don't move maybe as fast as venture capitalists would. But at the same time, that's a more interesting path because there's a mutually beneficial relationship there between the right alignment of corporate partner with what you're doing. So it could be a supplier partner that can help you not only produce components for your manufacturing company, but also then be a capital source.
Yeah. So Adam, turning to you, Plug and Play has such a great global network of accelerators. You've touched thousands of companies through your accelerator programs across industries, and you've had a chance to travel all over the world. Why is it so hard to replicate Silicon Valley?
Well, I think part of it is that it's just when people are interested in innovating, they naturally move towards Silicon Valley, and the more people move towards Silicon Valley and react to that, the more people need to, and the more it has that reputation. And so it kind of creates this snowball effect, which is really great because then you have, this huge ecosystem of all these startups and these corporates together that can really, work together and create kind of a special space, which, as you said, is not really available anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
Although there are places, Detroit is beginning to have a growing startup scene. Los Angeles, of course, and there's, a number of different places across the world, like Israel, for example. But it's not quite, Silicon Valley, of course.
So let's say you have a startup in front of you and you're advising them on how best to take advantage of these different geographies. Let's say, Adam and Tess, you can take the Silicon Valley, California angle, and then you can take the Michigan angle. What would you tell them on how best to access the strengths of each of these regions? So I'll let whoever start first.
Are you restricting it to the startup to a certain industry? I'm assuming an autonomous vehicle industry.
No restrictions.
Well, for this audience, we'll do that. I think specifically in autonomous vehicles, agnostic to what geography you're in, but I'll get to that. We're in the hype cycle of technologies. There's a peak where everyone's really excited and bullish, and then there's a trough of disillusionment. I think autonomous vehicles is just starting, and the time to when L5 will really ubiquitously be driving in the streets of Los Angeles is more far out than we think. So I would advise startups that are pursuing in the AV landscape to look for sources of revenue in the meantime when L2 through 4 are coming to fruition and before the safety driver can be removed, because I think it's going to take longer than expected to get the person out of the physical car. That was actually my thesis behind investing in a company called Phantom Auto. It's a teleops company, so when the AI hits an edge corner case, when it doesn't know what to do, a human will need to be in the feedback loop. Humans are underrated, and this human can come in, remote control into the car, and a person anywhere else in the world using the sensors already on the car can help it navigate this sticky situation. To geography, I'll let, I've spoken enough, I'll let Adam and Robbie talk about optimizing the hard question.
So I don't know that I can speak to geography that well either, to be honest. But let's say there's some startup doing whatever kind of technology they're doing. What we see very often is that they come to meet with a large corporation to pitch at them, and I think there's a little bit of a lack of tailoring their message. I think they have to think, okay, what is our path to commercialization, and how do we apply our technology to a problem that this large corporation may be facing. And I think that's probably one of the most important messages that I can give to them, whether they're pitching to a corporation who could potentially do investment in them through a CVC, or doing POC and joint projects, or talking to a VC, because I think even different VCs probably have different priorities and interests, and I think they really need to be tailoring their messaging rather than having a single pitch that they just go to every single time.
All right.
So I'll start with geography. I mean, I think the challenge in the Detroit and the Michigan market to begin with is there's just such a little amount of true venture capital funding, right, that's available. It's all on the coast. It's in Chicago. And so I think that's part of the challenge is the ecosystem in Detroit is so underdeveloped relative to other places in the country. And so if you're giving advice to a startup company, it's, well, one, don't try to build trucks because it's really hard. But two, you really have to look far and wide. And then I think to the flip side of that, to the investor community, is that if you want to continue to develop new geographies that are outside of the core markets of Silicon Valley or the coast, you have to spend time there. You have to do more. I've been involved with the Techstars community in Detroit for 5 years now, and while it's a great community, it's one program. It's one program. You can't rely on one program like that to support an entrepreneurial ecosystem in a particular geography. And so if you want more, you've got to invest more. You've got to support more companies. You've got to be able to do enough to really develop that ecosystem, get founders who then have successful exits to stay and reinvest in that ecosystem.
I think there's momentum building, though.
There is.
Just 2 years ago, Duo Security was the only
That's a
unicorn
perfect
in Michigan,
example.
and now
Yeah.
there's 6. I
Rivian,
believe.
StockX, yeah, 20
Which
year.
is phenomenal. It was just took that one company to a unicorn is a company that's valued over $1 billion. There's dozens in the Bay, and now dozens, probably hundreds. I should know the number. And now there's so many more in Michigan, and people can aspire and look up to that valuation and follow in their footsteps. From that, I think will trickle down other Techstars, other accelerators and incubators that the University of Michigan, I think, does a great job of already creating. The Desai Institute, the Center for Entrepreneurship. And I see an analogy between the University of Michigan and Detroit in the automotive industry, as in Stanford and San Francisco in semiconductors, why it's called Silicon Valley. Let's hope in 2 or 3 years we'll have
Continues to grow, right,
even
yeah.
more.
So I'm going to throw out a scenario in our closing minutes. So I'd like you to answer, and then maybe if you have some thoughts on it. So let's say that you have a startup, and I could offer you a Detroit-based headquarters, or Cleveland, or Chicago, and you would have access to any customer, big customer you wanted in the Midwest, and access to all of your supply chain, optimized hardware. Let's say it's a hardware startup. Or you could go to Silicon Valley, have access to a glut of software engineers, but you also know that they're going to be cycling through, and all the right types of venture funding at every point in your business. What would you choose if I gave you the red pill or the blue pill? And then just your thoughts on that question.
I think my perspective is, it depends on what the business needs. And so if it's a hardware company,
Yeah.
then, chances are they're going to need that supply chain, they're going to need an end customer, and they're going to need some of their,
Let's say it is a hardware company.
Yeah. So I think in that case, you might look at, Detroit or Cleveland or Chicago. For a different type of company, the answer may be different. And this is, there's so many factors out there. It depends on, what's all going on with the company. And I'm assuming this is the mobility industry. But I think my answer would be, to have all that ready, that would, it's hard to beat.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the predicament we're talking about on this panel, which is why you don't want to have to choose. You want to have to access to both. I mean, if I'm an entrepreneur, I want access to both of those things.
Yep.
And how do you make that bridge, right? How do you start to create the bridge between the two communities? I think that's
exactly what I was hoping. Okay.
I like the both answer. I'll choose the Midwest, though. It's the competition for talent in the Bay, you're not only competing against other startups, but you're competing against the Apple, the Facebook, and the Googles of the world, and retaining your engineers is the most difficult thing. The salaries and the equity they get are inflated. And just owning an office, it's very expensive. I encourage a lot of my companies to move elsewhere, and they're moving to Denver and Seattle and Austin, and I think the 3 you mentioned should be added to the list.
Yep.
I think on a talent perspective, something you mentioned, talk about Silicon Valley, the talent problem in the Midwest is equally as painful around engineering, around manufacturing talent, because you're at 3% unemployment. So the same skilled labor, the same types of technicians that you need aren't available, or are very difficult to then draw away, because in the same vein in the automotive space in particular, you've got all the OEs as well as your tier 1 and tier 2 large tier 2s that you're competing with for talent as well. So again, it's a similar problem that you have from a talent perspective in the Midwest that you do in Silicon Valley, maybe different from a pricing perspective, but still painful.
We can offer equity though, which is something that the tier 1s can't.
You'd be surprised how many people, even if you're offering equity, look at that and say, well, I have a benefit package and a stock, an option or a 40, whatever it is.
Cultural, educational
very,
thing. Absolutely.
Yeah. And the reason as a state, as an economic development agency, we often have to compare, sort of looking at the 4 variables of capital, talent, supply chain, and customers, and weighing those and saying, okay, if Michigan's good at these things, where are the areas that we should focus on within sort of talent and software engineering? But let's transition into talent and the role of universities. Is there more that universities can be doing in this conversation, whether it's between Stanford and Michigan or Michigan State, Cal, to help drive sort of this regional partnership forward?
Absolutely. I didn't even know what venture capital was when I went to Michigan. and now they have this amazing Center for Entrepreneurship, and they're educating their students about what entrepreneurship is and how to build your company and what venture capital is. And I think that's how it starts with educating students on this is an option to have a career in.
Yeah. Now, what about, switching gears, what about the role of governments in creating regulatory right-of-way, public-private partnerships? Is there anything more that either side could be doing there within the public sector?
From a talent perspective?
No, talent, yes, maybe, but switching gears from universities to government.
My personal feeling on it is that I think from a university perspective, the university environment is one thing, and that's an animal unto itself.
Yeah.
Produces a certain level of talent. I think for new companies in today's day and age and going forward, we need to think about different pathways of education that are outside the traditional university system that can be supported by public-private partnerships and other types of educational pathways that don't exist today or are very limited in resources.
Okay. All right, we are running out of time, but closing question. In 2 sentences, or 3, whatever you need, where is the relationship between Silicon Valley and Michigan going to be in 5 years? Sort of a vision of the future, Adam.
Yeah, so I think from my experience, it seems to be getting increasingly intertwined. Companies are becoming more global, and with that, you have companies where they're based in Michigan and they have Silicon Valley offices because they're trying to, build up capabilities. And those companies in Silicon Valley are seeing, this is very expensive and difficult to retain talent, and so they go to Michigan to build up, their capabilities in a different perspective. And so I think, it's going to continue to be increasingly intertwined. And that's going to go, from a talent perspective, products, basically everything. And, a company may have operations in both places, along with anywhere else in the world.
I would hope that I would, echo what Tess said earlier, that the continued strength of that relationship grows, and because of some of the unicorns that you're seeing coming out of the Midwest and the Detroit area in particular, that only continues to foster further development. And maybe one day there'll be a hyperloop between the two, so it'll be a really easy journey to get between the Bay Area and the Midwest.
All right, close us out.
I imagine and hope that top venture capitalists spend time and make investments in Michigan.
All right, well, let's thank our panelists, and thank you so much for listening.